Pierre Gasly probably made a huge mistake, yeah? Oh, who am I kidding? He made a gigantic mistake. He's probably going to bed every single night and just saying to himself, what did they do? What did they do? I think it's becoming increasingly obvious now that Alpine is not long for this world, that is Formula One, and its lead driver is now having to do his best to try and hold the fort, reaffirm that he made the right decision by basically blowing smoke up the team's bottom. You know things are getting bad for a Formula One team when there are rumours circling around the internet, spreading like wildfire, that a certain website out there is linked to become the new title sponsor of your team, and even though it has credentials in other motorsporting categories, people don't immediately dismiss it, as in they go, oh, okay, it's weird, but you know, they're not saying that's ridiculous. And considering the person who's effectively in charge of the Alpine F1 team, their lead spokesperson, and his legacy in the sport, oh, that would have been a terrible misstep, a really bad lack in judgment, and oh, it would have been so awkward. I just think the team is destined to sell up relatively soon, and Eddie Jordan actually has a lot to say, which I agree with, and usually I treat what Eddie says with a degree of consideration and caution, but in regards to selling up an F1 team and the signs attached to it, I would trust him more than most, since he basically did just that with his own stake in Jordan F1 by selling it to Midland Group in 2005 for $30 million. Curiously enough, to another Canadian billionaire, so Papa Stroll cannot say that he was the first Canadian billionaire to buy out the Jordan team or the Silverstone team. No, Alex Schneider did that back in 2005 for the Midland Group and then changed it to Spiker. But hey, at least there was a little bit more continuity with Papa Stroll. It didn't keep changing its name all the time. Oh no, wait, it did that too. And the thing about all of this, which really puzzles me, is that EJ, you might just think he's just this random pundit, but no, he's now on a billionaire at this point, and he's Adrian Newey's manager. He's not just a guy who knows how to play the spoons. Why I think he's right about the entire Alpine situation can be summed up with this comment right here, and I will back them up after this. Ahem. At the moment, they are the most floundering team. It is absolutely embarrassing. I find it embarrassing to watch. Gasly and Ocon are capable of winning races. With Alpine in the current vision, do I see them there next year? Absolutely not. Not a chance. I think it's wide open for a sale. I think Renault have pulled back from it. They don't want to spend the money on the engines, and the engine for 2026 is such a big outlay in terms of development or cost, it's frightening them, even though the value of the team is high. They all talk about £1 billion for a team. I just feel that Alpine have been disgraceful in terms of not being able to perform for their drivers for their team. To give them that car for which to compete in a world championship is just unacceptable. Unacceptable. I wouldn't put up with it. It is shocking. Yeah, Eddie, I don't blame you. And that whole idea about the 2026 engine, well, that's old news because now Renault's effectively pulled out of that. They've cancelled the program. They've now got most of their people working on different projects. Bruno Famin has been cast over there to spend out his remaining days there in complete and utter obscurity. That whole Mercedes thing is probably going to happen because Jordan was going through a rough time of it in themselves back in the 2000s through mostly external factors which impacted its health and overall scope. The 1991 Jordan, a design classic, was surprisingly good for its debut year in an era of Formula One where you had pre-qualifying and people who had maybe about 10 quid and some spare change in their pocket and a napkin could come up with their own F1 team. He actually did a really good job, and by 1999, they were the best of the rest. Basically, after 2000, the team suffered from Honda snubbing them in the race to become the full-fat works team in favour of BAR, effectively killing off the Mugen-Honda relationship that EJ had had since European F3000 back in 1989, and they were showing up their works operation in 2000 as well. Then he tried to sue Vodafone for breaking their sponsorship agreement to go to Ferrari and lost hard. Then Honda gave up on them entirely for 2003. Prost, what was once Ligier, went under in 2001. Arrows went under in the following year, having been around since the 70s. Jordan realised that, yeah, I'm not long for this world, so decided to sell up before the team declared bankruptcy. And the last thing that Eddie Jordan wanted to do was to shutter a completely good team and, of course, going into bankruptcy. And understandably, in the UK and Europe, going into bankruptcy, yeah, it's nothing like in the US. Oh, and by the way, this quote, 19 years hence, is really powerful and it really complements the quote I talked about earlier. This year's surprise package will be Renault, but I can't see Ferrari being beaten. Oh, this just makes his comments all the more salty because he once had faith in that team and now he doesn't anymore. It's almost been like this personal journey. The point here is that Alpine right now is not in a dignified position. You could argue that Jordan was blessed with not having social media hounding him at the time when Jordan fell off a cliff in 2003 and 4. Otherwise, he would have been thrown to the lions himself, criticised for the way his team had declined. The difference here, though, is that Jordan went under not through lack of trying. They did everything possible to try to stay on the grid. They tried to broker a deal with Ford, that didn't work out. They tried to get what other sponsorships they could get, but after losing the DHL ticket and then the Vodafone ticket, it was going to be very difficult. Their performances were dropping, Honda had abandoned them. It wasn't exactly looking rosy if you wanted to partner up with Jordan. They weren't exactly scoring points and podiums and wins like they had done just a few years prior. And as for Alpine, the news coverage has been far less glowing, and the team isn't really seen as plucky or a go-getter attitude or even a fan favourite anymore, even though you could attribute a lot of the negativity in the media due to the constant drubbing from the likes of Red Bull and Christian Horner, and their inability to adapt or invest in the turbo hybrid era of F1, and that being sprayed all over British media. Seriously, this was a really big situation, and Renault was seen as just not pouring in enough money into the 2014 power unit, like Mercedes were, and then Honda were trying their best to, and on top of that, they got the likes of Mechachrome to build the engine that they had developed and built the parts for. So with Mechachrome and Formula 2, you can see where we're going here. And the war of words between the lead developer of the engine and then the Renault team principal Cyril Abiteboul and Horner, it became legendary through the 2010s. But that being said, Christian Horner was somewhat justified to be angry toward the likes of Renault, because during the V8 era, they were really good, they were really competent, but they just dropped the ball hard and got complacent for the 2014 era. Mercedes ploughed in so much time and effort and resources into this, and they got what they deserved. Whereas Renault, they just coasted. They didn't really see much point in putting in more innovation. They lost customers, and for the longest time, they've been the only supplier for any F1 team, and that is to their own team. And even though Bruno Famin, the now sacked team principal of Alpine, has claimed that the power unit is the most developed and improved engine on the grid, the overall sentiment toward the team is that of apathy, indifference, disorganization, and greed. Oh, and by the way, Bruno, you are wrong. That Renault power unit is not the most developed on the grid. That would be the likes of Honda. After where they came from in 2015, why do you think Red Bull picked them over you? And also, I don't recall anyone talking about Renault as being akin to a GP2 engine. Yeah, the Renault engine's underpowered, but not that badly underpowered, about like 80 or 100 brake horsepower. Yeah, no, you're wrong. I've said this before and I will say it again, but the team is no longer in F1 for the sake of its heritage, which goes back decades, nor its desire to win and be amongst the best. There's no direction anymore. The only motivation here is to remain in the sport to capitalise from its meteoric rise in popularity, capital and awareness, as well as try and hawk a few more Alpine sports cars. And according to the likes of Stefano Domenicali, the CEO of Formula One Management, he reckons that the upcoming movie, the Brad Pitt one, is going to actually make F1 even more popular. It will have an even bigger impact than Drive to Survive had, and I'm a little bit skeptical about it, but to be fair, sinking 2 or 3 hours to go and see one movie about Formula One is a lot less to invest in than spending maybe 20, 30 hours to catch up on all of Drive to Survive. And I can't wait for the comments to come pouring in come 2026, or whenever people go and see the movie, and then they go and watch an actual F1 race, they go and look at all of the drivers, and then go, oh my god, they're actual drivers? I thought they were extras! Because you know those comments will happen, trust me. So what about Pierre Gasly then? Why has he made such a huge mistake, as you so claim? Well, the team that he signed on with will be nothing like it was in 2022, and by 2026, it may be a smaller team with a customer engine and an insecure future. Back in 2022, with Otmar Safnauer leading the charge, it actually looked like a fairly decent team. Okay, they weren't really going to be pushing for the likes of third place in the constructors or anything like that, but they had secured a win in 2021 and they were gaining podiums, and they did have Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon on the books, even though they'd gone through a bit of a rough patch with Oscar Piastri. But still, Safnauer was doing really well. He was setting everything in order, getting things ready for the future, and then making sure that the A522 would then develop into a fairly competent car. And Gasly, even though he was with Ocon, clearly Safnauer and his team were able to convince Gasly Gasly to come over anyway. And of course, hey, they were matching McLaren, and McLaren were a physically bigger team, and they were considerably better than the team that Pierre Gasly was departing from, AlphaTauri, coming 9th in 2022. And for the longest time, until maybe just a few months ago, Gasly was praising all of the work that Alpine had undertaken, saying that it was fantastic to be part of a works team, that it can lead to faster feedback loops, further optimization, better than most. But these days, though, the whole argument about being a works team over a customer team is sort of becoming a moot topic, because McLaren's a customer team of Mercedes, and look where they are at the moment. But now looking back on it, maybe he should have stuck around at AlphaTauri and Racing Bulls for a little bit longer, since the team now is thumping its chest and claiming it's its own team, it's growing, it's gaining major sponsors, and will soon, alongside Red Bull Racing, become an effective works team with the Red Bull powertrains operation coming online. And on top of that, Pierre Gasly would be with a driver who he absolutely adores. The wholesome relationship of Gasly and Tsunoda at the same team, it would have continued. But then, having said that, Tsunoda might have remained just as fiery and temperamental as he had done before. Maybe him having Daniel Ricciardo as his teammate was for the best in terms of just calming down if he wants any hope of being alongside Max Verstappen. But then again, Ricciardo would have just been skulking around anyway in the background, so he might have been used for some driver coaching or something. I don't know. But either way, Gasly and Tsunoda as the two main drivers, I think people would have been really happy with that. I know hindsight's 2020 and all, but the shopping list of talking points that Gasly had to say about Alpine are all being ticked off at his old team, and the list has been torn to shreds at his current team. All the things that he had praised them for are gone or going. Now he has no choice but to act as their spokesperson, the only constant left. Seriously, as far as I can tell, he's the only senior guy left of that team that's been around for more than 2 or 3 years at this point. And quite frankly, Pierre's got no other option right now. I said this a few months ago, I say it today. Pierre Gasly has no choice. Nowhere else will take him, because everyone's been sewn up now until maybe at the earliest 2027. All that Pierre can do now is justify the team's reason to fully transform the concept, having said that the 2023 iteration had run its course and the scope for development of it was limited, and that this new car was worth the short-term pain. Even though, realistically, all the upgrades that they have done this year have been akin to what Williams is doing right now, in just weight saving. That's all they can do. There is no time, there is no resources, there is actually no technical person in charge in which to make compelling and legitimate upgrades. All they can do is just make the car lighter. And then look what Sauber's doing as well. They brought in an all-new concept for this year, and it's even worse than the Alpine. Instead of getting a handful of points like they did with Alfa Romeo last year, they've now got 0 points. Although there is a little less pressure with the likes of Sauber, it's becoming Audi, they're really focusing on 2026, that's okay. The investors, Audi, that group, they've got time, they can wait. Whereas Alpine, Renault, I don't think they really want to stick around for much longer more than they have to, because they want to make their money, they want to cut their losses eventually, and then just leave the sport. Maybe coming back in 10 years' time if it gets a little cheaper or something like that, but I don't know at this point. And on top of all of this, Esteban Ocon will just not stop talking, justifiably so, mind you, about all the stuff that's been going on at Alpine and how bad it's been. And even though Pierre Gasly is speaking publicly about, oh, the team's really listening to me and I'm glad that they listened to my instructions about changing the concept, Esteban Ocon's been saying the complete opposite, saying that all the drivers that he had worked with, including Daniel, and then Fernando, and Pierre as well, were not being listened to. One of the major criticisms that Ocon had is that he didn't have the circle of people around him that could interpret what he was saying about the car in practice sessions and testing sessions, and then implement it into the setup and the design of the car, and either go, yeah, we can do that, no, we can't do that, here's why. No, they just kind of did their own thing, and then by the following year, all of the stuff that Ocon had talked about, as well as Gasly, Alonso, Ricciardo, it wasn't being heeded. It was just a different car, or not much different at all. Usually I take what Esteban says with a pinch of salt, but in this regard, this context, much like with Eddie Jordan about selling up a team, I am inclined to believe Esteban because it does match up with what's going on at Alpine at the moment. He would have been frustrated with all of this going down, and he would have given everything to the team, which gave him his second chance in F1 back in 2020. He would want to keep them sweet and commit to make sure that he could stay there. But that commitment has seemingly fallen on deaf ears. Now, either Ocon is over-exaggerating the situation and it's not as bad as it actually is, or Pierre Gasly is being the PR man, the constant of the group. He is the only person that has stuck around and actually given Alpine the time of day, and he's now just realizing, hey, if I just wait here, I can make this fully my team, and whoever becomes my teammate will have to bow down to me. So all I've got to do is just play the party line, say that they're doing great even though we've had our difficulties, and then I'll be absolutely fine, whatever might happen. Or maybe he's just trying to find ways of coping with his decision. Okay, well then what? What does Gasly do? He's picked the wrong team, he's stuck. And Renault constantly is denying that they're going to be selling the team, but all of the signs are pointing towards a team sale eventually. What's the end game of it all? Well, come on. I think it's obvious that last year, Forbes valued this team at well over $1 billion, and based on its performance right now, it's not worth $1 billion. That's why Flavio was brought in. He was around when Renault bought out the team from Benetton back in the day. He would have experience in how to make Enston run as smoothly as possible, ready for the new buyers to come in and sweep up all the assets at a knockdown price, or at least a good value one. His judgment will be critical in how the automaker presents itself to any prospective bidders. And I do not think that Andretti will be buying this team. What? Why do you think that? This is the only way that Andretti's going to get into F1 at this point. Yeah, that is very true. But look, the only way they're going to be getting in is to buy a slot which might be worth $1 billion, $1.5 billion. Yet that money is just to get onto the grid, save for all of the costs that General Motors and Andretti are already pouring into their efforts. And what are they going to do with Enston? Are they going to use it as well? Are they going to merge the two operations, the Silverstone and Enston one? Or are they just going to mothball the Enston one and cost people their jobs or ask people to move to Silverstone in Oxfordshire? No, it's just not practical. What I think probably will happen, now that Oliver Oakes is the team principal at Alpine, is that Hitech GP, alongside one of their billionaires, Vladimir Kim from Kazakhstan, will most likely buy out the rest of the operations, maybe take a small stake in it to begin with, maybe encourage Ryan Reynolds' maximum effort operation to put in more of a stake, so that means they can have more of a say in terms of where the team goes and its direction, as well as what they can do for marketing purposes. I do think this might be a slow and steady situation. We're not going to be seeing Renault divesting itself of the team instantly. I think 2026 will be a Hail Mary operation. Get that customer deal with Mercedes off the ground, and if they do well, then they do well. Alpine might stick around, they might still have a little bit more, but they'll still be the majority shareholders. But if they don't do well, then they'll just get rid of it entirely, and then it'll become Hitech GP come 2027. Because Hitech were also a serious contender for a spot on the grid when they submitted their application last year alongside Andretti, but they were rejected by the FIA without any explanation made public. And I think that Hitech actually complained about the situation, that they weren't treated fairly, not long after it, but I can't find any information about it, but I remember hearing about it. But I think Hitech at this point's got no choice but to actually buy out a team, because right now, Formula One's made it clear that they do not want an 11th team, regardless of who it is, and Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the FIA president, has seemingly betrayed Andretti, having backed them to become an 11th team and approved the application, giving them the green light. He's now going, oh, why don't you just buy an F1 team now? The FIA president encouraged all of this kerfuffle in the first place, and now he's gone back on it, him having talked with Stefano in public, them coming up with the peace deal, and then suddenly, oh, would you look at that, he's suddenly against the Andretti deal. And that in of itself is okay, fine. If this is going to be a transitional period, then fair enough. It's going to be similar to what Sauber and Audi are doing. That is just going to eventually become a Hitech GP come 2027, whatever. But what does this mean for Pierre Gasly? Oliver Oakes here is not really that familiar with Pierre Gasly, at least not as far as I can remember. And I think that he might have his own mission statement for what he would like to see the team operate as. We might see Paul Aron become their reserve driver, perhaps. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. People were dooming and glooming about the idea of Nikita Mazepin getting back on the grid, but I think he's no longer eligible for a super license or something. I think that's expired or something. You have to reapply. Anyway, I do feel like now that might be an opportunity for some former high-tech greats to come in and make a name for themselves if they couldn't get into F1 prior. And people have been talking about Alex Palou getting onto the F1 grid, and that would be a little bit of a coup and a long time coming, it having not happened with McLaren, and of course McLaren suing him for about $30 million for breach of contract or something like that because he's stuck with Chip Ganassi at IndyCar rather than going to them. And he does have 2 IndyCar championships as well, so he is a very storied driver. Him coming over to Formula One, it would probably interest people who are only watching IndyCar and not Formula One for maybe giving it an opportunity, some of the American audience. And yes, I know, Alex Palou is from Spain. He is not American, but he is very well known in America. And yet I am also aware that he is not a spring chicken at this point. He is approaching 30. He will be definitely almost 30 by the time 2027 comes along, but I could see maybe a Paul Aaron and Alex Palou lineup eventually. That could be the ticket. Or maybe with Jack Doohan perhaps, because the Alpine Academy is still there. It might become the Hitech Academy or something. That could be a pathway if Alpine chooses to divest itself entirely. But in regards to Pierre Gasly, it might actually be a bad thing, or it might not secure his super duper long-term future. It might be in doubt should the team not kick on in 2026 under his leadership and making all of the decisions that he made over the years. Pierre will need to look around the driver market for 2027 after many of his colleagues will know how well their chosen teams fared with the rule changes. And if Alpine hasn't impressed by then, his stock in F1 will have been greatly impacted for the worse, and right now, he might have handed his arch nemesis Ocon an easy A. Because even though people are thinking that Haas is going to go downhill next year, that Ocon will completely destroy the team, he will eviscerate Oliver Behrman and tear him a new one, I think that realistically, that might have been the better choice than staying with Alpine, because, put simply, Ayo Komatsu has done wonders with that team in such a short space of time, and he's even been able to convince the likes of Gene Haas to actually open up his wallet. Prizing open Gene's wallet and then just going boom! That's dust, by the way. Oh, and yeah, they probably listen to their drivers as well these days. Poor Pierre. And to find out why I think I do rate this lineup of Behrman and Ocon more than I would have thought initially, go and watch this video next, because there are some very interesting choices here, and it might prove dividends. Unlike with Pierre.